Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, January 27th, 2026. My dear friend Matt Ho joins us now. Matt, thank you very much. I want to talk to you about Alexi Prey's greatest hour of danger on the streets in Minneapolis. But before we get there, what is happening in Syria? Is the government that Donald Trump embraced in the Oval Office killing its own people?
Hi, Judge. Thanks for having me back on. Yes, they have been killing their own people since they've come into power more than a year ago. Thousands have been killed in violence in Syria since December of 2024. Some of it sectarian, some of it a continuation of the horrific reality of Syria for the last 15 years, and some of it coming from the Syrian government, either as the spoils of victory, as revenge taking, or as trying to consolidate their power. And you're seeing that Syria is continuing to be divided up by foreign powers trying to create their own spheres of influence, trying to use various factions or sects for their own purposes, for their own geopolitical purposes. I mean, the list of foreign powers involved here, Judge, is, as long as my arm. You're talking about the United States, Turkey, Israel, the UAE, Qatar, Iran. I mean, there's probably a few that I'm leaving out. So what we're seeing here, I think, is logical. It shouldn't be a surprise. It is both something that is coming from internal or Syrian or domestic realities, as well as from foreign pressure or foreign manipulation. And you're seeing, though, consolidation, though, by the Syrian government, or attempt to consolidate by the Syrian government, that is being greatly aided by the Americans. And the storyline in this is one that's familiar to people who are familiar with the Middle East, particularly the story of the Kurds, is once again a betrayal of the Kurdish people. The Americans utilized the Kurds in Syria for a decade and a half for their own purposes. And now that they have someone better in charge, or they got what they want with the ouster of Assad, and they've got the former Al-Qaeda boss. I don't know if you become, people always say to me, there's no such thing as a former Marine. I can't do as many pull-ups as I used to do, so I doubt that. But is there any such thing as a former Al-Qaeda boss? I doubt that as well.
So why are they turning on the Kurds? Why is the United States not protecting its longstanding ally?
Because the Kurds are no longer useful to the Americans here. This Al-Qaeda boss, al-Sharar, provides a greater base. He has a greater grip on power. And most importantly, he's only located in Syria. So he's not complicated. Disregard his jihadist past, disregard that up until literally a couple months ago, there was still a $25 million bounty on his head by the U.S. State Department or by the American Justice Department. The reality is that he is able to consolidate power in Syria in the way that the Kurds never could. The Kurds are also spread across multiple nations, including American allies like Turkey or Turkey, as well as American enemies like Iran. So to use the Kurds for American purposes is complicated. So whereas you want to back the Kurds in Syria in order to try and overthrow the government, now that you got the government that you want there in Syria, you don't want the Kurds having any type of autonomy. You don't want the Kurds being able to do their own thing, certainly not to resist. And then, but you might want the Kurds, as we just saw in the last week, to stage an uprising in Iran to try and affect regime change. Use the Kurds there. So abandon the Kurds in Syria, but take the cause in Iran. Yeah,
I'm not a fan of Churchill, as you know. I think he was a war criminal, but a couple of his one-liners are apt. There are no lasting friendships. There are no lasting enmities. There are only lasting interests. And the Kurds are no longer of interest to the needs of the United States, or apparently of Israel. I guess the United States is subordinate to Israel. We know that, but certainly in this part of the world.
Right. The relationship with the Kurds and the Israelis is long. Last week, I talked about being in the Kurdish part of Iraq and seeing an airport that the Israelis had built more than 20 years ago for the Kurds for their own purposes, for this idea of the Kurds don't have any friends, the Israelis don't have any friends, so there can be an alliance there of sorts, or we can use each other for our own purposes. And the Kurds are often utilized this way. I've said before, I believe the first time the American government started sending weapons to the Kurds was in the second half of the Nixon administration, of 1973. And that was to overthrow the government in Iraq, or at least provide some type of autonomy for the Kurds, while not wanting the Kurds to utilize those weapons against the American ally in Tehran, the Shah. But then when there's a change of government, when there's a coup in Iraq and Saddam Hussein and his clique come into power, well, now that's somewhat useful. And so we're going to stop arming the Kurds. And if Saddam then wants to go ahead and gas them like he did throughout the Iraq-Iran war, we're going to cover for Saddam, or we're going to also help him get the chemical weapons. You know what I mean? This is an old story for the Kurds. You scratch your head as to why they keep taking this bait, why they think that the Americans are going to stand by them, or why they think some type of alliance with Israel might be beneficial. But you also realize that they are a nation they are people without a state. They are a nation without its own boundaries. And being there in this region where their population is spread across multiple countries due to people like Winston Churchill, you can also understand why their decision making sometimes is this way, where they're just trying to keep their heads above water and they're just trying to survive. And I should say this because I have a very fond place in my heart for the Kurds. I was there often when I was a part of the American occupation of Iraq. And it was one of those things, Judge, where the Kurds really did see us as liberators. I met Kurds in Iran. This is going back to 2004.
Does the CIA still control al-Jawlani?
Oh, I think so, yes. I think that if not, control might be too strong of a word. Maybe it's more of a partnership, a senior-junior partnership. Let's go back, Judge, to September when al-Jawlani visited, or al-Shara, whichever we want to call him, visited the United States to take part in the United Nations General Assembly. And Davis Petraeus, the American general, interviewed him. And Petraeus' words to Jawlani, to al-Shara, were, "Your success is our success."
What a sickening interview that was. Oh, God. All right. Are the negotiations in Abu Dhabi serious? I mean, what's to negotiate? Zelensky says we're not going to give up any territory. Now, he may be saying that for domestic political purposes, but the concession of territory, as well as the neutrality of the remainder of Ukraine, are not negotiable.
I think Zelensky understands the reality and that these talks are necessary. And I think they will give up that territory. They've already agreed to give up. The Ukrainians have already agreed to essentially give up the land that Russia is occupying. And this disagreement seems to be over those parts of the Donbass, 2,000 square kilometers or something like that the Russians haven't yet occupied. But by the end of spring, summertime, they will. And I think Zelensky understands that. I think he's using this time to try and get his house in order. We've seen these shakeups if you want to call it that, if you want to call the arresting of ministers shakeups. You've seen that in Ukraine. So I think he's trying to find that domestic political space, create that domestic political order for him to get away with making a deal with Russia. He understands the situation with the United States, that the support is not going to be there. He understands the shallowness, the vapidity, the hollowness of the Europeans, how they really can't support him no matter what they say. They can't even provide for his budget. They're still $40 billion or $50 billion short, even though the European Union went through almost a year of heartache trying to get him money, and they're still $50 billion short or so. He realizes all that. So I think what Zelensky probably is trying to accomplish right now is create a political order within Ukraine that allows him to negotiate a deal with the Russians to end this war. Because we have to remember that Zelensky gets elected on this idea of making peace with Russia, ending the war in the Donbass. And as soon as he comes into office, the far right, the ultra nationalists come in and they say to him, if you make a deal with the Russians, if you make peace, you'll be hanging from that tree right over there. And if the story is correct, they actually pointed out the specific tree they'd hang him from. You know, I mean, so I think that's what Zelensky is up against here. You know, there is a possibility he might abscond. He may be like Ashraf Ghani and flee with all his millions and millions of dollars, or maybe even billions of dollars. But there is also the real possibility that he's going to try and see this through. So the important thing about the negotiations, despite how the American press wants to describe them as being fruitless or frustrated or impossible, is that they're still going on. And after this round of negotiations in Abu Dhabi, you had both the Russians and the Ukrainians saying it was constructive. And anyone who looks at wars, looks at negotiations, looks at peace deals, know that none of these things happen in one single weekend. They don't happen over the period of months. Many times it takes years to get to this point. And so I think we do have this place that we are in this place where the Russians and Ukrainians, I think, finding a deal, finding a negotiated settlement, ending this war, at least temporarily, is something that is achievable in the next few months.
As we segue in our conversation to the United States, and before we get to Minneapolis, I want you to watch the new president of TikTok, who has banned a word that you and I and the folks on this program use quite regularly. Chris, cut number 13.
We made a change to designate the use of the term Zionist as a proxy for a protected attribute as hate speech. So if somebody were to use Zionist, of course you can use it in the sense of you're a proud Zionist, but if you're using it in the context of degrading somebody, calling somebody a Zionist as a dirty name, then that gets designated as hate speech to be moderated against. Over the course of 2024, we tripled the amount of accounts that we were banning for hateful activity. We also have, I think, over 24 Jewish organizations that are constantly feeding us intelligence and information when they spot violative trends. There is no finish line. There's no finish line to moderating hate speech, identifying hateful trends, trying to keep the platform safe. There's no such thing as an end game.
I guess that's what is to be expected after Larry Ellison and his colleagues used the federal government to engineer their way into the ownership or majority ownership of TikTok. Now they'll begin suppressing speech that they hate or fear.
Right.
And that's a legitimate, valid word that the Israelis themselves use.
Right. And this happened immediately. They didn't even wait. They didn't even give it a decent interval. Right. They didn't even give it a week or a month or, next season. They right away, the censorship. What's also really important in this story is that just as they launched this censorship, they also redid TikTok's user agreements that changed the whole structure of data privacy for TikTok users. So, of course, we all understood the purposes of selling TikTok. It was never, or forcing the sale of TikTok. It was never about that the insidious Chinese were going to sneak into our phones and steal our data or blackmail us because we made a video of ourselves dancing at one point that we're now embarrassed of, or whatever the story from the federal government, both the Biden and the Trump governments has been.
Right.
It's been about censorship, but it's also been about allowing American companies to get all this data. Because as soon as the censorship hit, also the change in the user agreement came about, where TikTok users now have less data protection, have less privacy.
I think they're going to kill it
with the Chinese.
They're going to kill this this asset, and something else will pop up, and the young people will go there. So the the Alex Preti murder, it's pretty clear from all of the videos that have been made public that he attempted to come to the rescue of a woman who had been videoing the ICE fellows. They didn't like it. They pushed her. He came to her aid. They didn't like that he did that. They pepper sprayed him in his eyes, which temporarily blinded him. The last thing he saw on earth was the pepper spray coming at him. He didn't know it at that moment. Then as he went down, his jacket moved up, and they saw his handgun. The handgun was in a holster in the small of his back, and he never touched it during this entire period. One of the guys removed the gun. He took the gun, and then he ran away with it, which is odd. And then his colleagues murdered Alex by shooting him in the back 9 times. And then, of course, Kristi Noem and Carolyn Levitt began saying he was a terrorist. He came there to kill people. He came there to murder people. Kash Patel said incorrectly, you don't have the right to carry a gun at a protest. Actually, that's an express right that you do have in the state of Minnesota. And I don't know where this is going to go. The president and Kristi Noem bear tremendous responsibility for this, as does Tom Homan, who has his own issues, as does Gregor Bovino, as do those thugs in the streets. The thugs in the streets should be arrested by force by the Minneapolis police and charged with murder and not given bail.
That's absolutely correct, Judge. I mean, you watch these videos, and who are you going to believe, the government or your lying eyes?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just astounding that there is any pushback against what you just said. But it shows that there always be parts of our population that will follow the authoritarians. They will respect power. They will get in line and be obedient. I mean, you look at these video analysis that have been done. That's the one thing too about these murders of both Good and Pretti, is there are multiple video angles. I think with Good's murder, there are at least 6 camera angles. With Pretti, there's just 3 or 4. And in no time, people do these analyses where it's clear what happened. And we can't even, so much happens in these videos that we can't even express it all. We could spend a whole episode just talking about how this ICE agent attacks that woman. I mean, she is leaving the street. She was filming them. She's leaving the street, and he comes across the street and shoves her with both hands onto an icy sidewalk. I mean, just that in itself should be the news story for the week, that a federal law enforcement agent acted in that way, let alone the idea that, as I described Renee Good last week as being the best among us because she's willing to put herself in between the powerful and the most vulnerable. And these thugs, these hooligans from ICE, they are the worst among us because they are the ones who are preying on the vulnerable. They're the ones who are attacking the vulnerable. You have now Alex Preti doing the same as Renee Good, even to a greater extent. As this ICE agent shoves this woman, he puts himself between the ICE agent and this woman. He doesn't touch the ICE agent. He's got his camera filming in one hand. He's got his other hand in the air, and the ICE agent pepper sprays him. and then they throw him to the ground, and then about 4 or 5 ICE agents pile onto him and start beating him. And then, as you described, they find the weapon, they pull the weapon from him, and then the ICE agent who has the weapon is halfway across the street before those 2 ICE agents shoot and kill Alex Pretti 9 times, as you said, in the back.
According to Christy Noem, they feared for their safety. They feared for their safety from a man they had just beaten, they had just temporarily blinded, and from whom they had taken his weapon. What was their fear?
And I imagine, Judge, if we get the body camera footage, we'll hear him saying things like you often hear in these cases, "I'm not resisting," right? You know, I mean, you'll probably hear something like that to make this case even more despicable. And this is not a case of these ICE agents being untrained. Jonathan Ross, who murdered Renee Good, he's been federal law enforcement for 18 years or so. The ICE agent, the one who they referenced, the government referenced, who shot and executed Alex Pretti, he's been an agent for 8 years. I think they said he was Customs and Border Patrol. He's been 8. So he's not untrained. These aren't people who are just recruited and given guns by Stephen Miller a month ago and put on the street. These are all men who have been part of this federal police force, this paramilitary force, going back to the Obama administration. So this idea that somehow it needs to be about more training, that this isn't something that's ideologically driven, that isn't politically driven. I mean, this whole context of why are there 3,000 or 4,000 federal law enforcement officers in Minneapolis is such a farce. When you look at where is Minneapolis in relation to other cities in terms of crime, it's not even in the top 50. Or if it's in the top 50, it's number 49. In terms of immigration, about 14% of Minneapolis's residents are foreign born. That's the national average. So why is ICE, why is Customs and Border Patrol, why is Greg Rubino's not there?
Because Minneapolis and St. Paul are sanctuary cities, because the state of Minnesota refused to give its voting rolls to the White House. Right. We know that because those demands were made by the Attorney General of the United States, and that was entered as evidence yesterday in the oral argument about restraining ICE, for which as a result of which a federal judge says, what does this have to do with immigration issues in the street? Is this some sort of retribution against public officials in Minnesota? Is that why there's 4,000 ICE agents destroying our city?
The idea that the Attorney General of the United States would ask for voting rolls, right, for voter identification, for which political party do your residents belong to, is just such an un-American concept. You can imagine a whole movie being made about just that plot alone. Just right. You can imagine
political hack using her position as the chief federal law enforcement officer of the land to try and effectuate the outcome of this oral argument. I got to play this clip for you. I haven't seen it. Chris just captured it. Apparently, President Trump is reading the polls about how ICE is being perceived in the country. Here's what he said just a few minutes ago. Chris, number 14.
With that being said, you can't have guns. You can't walk in with guns. You can't walk in with guns. You can't do that. But it's just a very unfortunate incident.
Have guns at a demonstration, which is defies what the Supreme Court said, or if he's saying ICE can't have guns. It's not clear to me what he meant right there. So maybe I was wrong when I said he was reading the polls. Maybe he's continuing to shoot himself in the foot politically. His disapproval rating, I've never heard of this, even in the Nixon years. His disapproval rating is now 52%.
I don't know. I don't think they have a plan, Judge. I think that there is this idea that we go after the blue states. But then you see that their next place they're going to go to is Maine. And you've got Susan Collins, the Republican senator, who's facing a contested election there this year. Actually, she's behind the Democratic candidates right now. So why would, if you're doing this purely for political reasons, why would you move on to a purple state, if you will, like Maine? You know, why not Massachusetts or New York or California, something solidly blue? You know, so they can't even keep to their own script. They can't even keep to their own plan. And I think this is because so much is just because of their own personalities involved here, because of who they are, because, as we've talked about this before, they are sadists, they are nihilists, they are narcissists, they are opportunists. Some of them, like Stephen Miller, are just so ideological, and their ideology is one of hate, that they can't see anything else. And so they become blind to any rational or logical decision making that might actually help them achieve their goal. Look, Barack Obama deported 450,000 people in 1 year, and nobody protested. I mean, people did. I shouldn't say that, because there were people who were, but the Democratic Party couldn't care less about it, right? I mean, they're not on track, I don't believe, to deport 450,000 people. You know, I mean, so why don't you just do it the way Obama did it, and, you know, it'll be a lot smoother and you'll achieve the effect you want. But the reality is, it's not about improving the quality of life for Americans. It's not about improving our economy. Even though we have a labor shortage in this country, we should be bringing in immigrants, as well as a declining population, all these different things, right? You know, I mean, their desire here is so much based upon their own personal circumstances, again, that they're sadists, that they're narcissists, that they're nihilists, or in the case of an organization, say like CBP or ICE, the institutional desires, right? You see a guy like Bovino, a guy like Ross, all that they've lived their lives through their careers, they are at the apex of it now, doing and wielding their power.
Let me stop you for just a minute. Here's Tom Homan arriving in, I think it's after he arrived in Minnesota, or maybe right before he left. I guess he's unfamiliar with the concept of chilling. That's where the government threatens people so that they will have second thoughts before they speak. Here he is saying we're going to create a database of the protesters, and we're going to inform their employers that they're protesting, as if protesting is something wrong. It happens to be protected in the First Amendment to the Constitution, you idiot. Not you, obviously, Homan. Chris, run the tape.
One thing I'm pushing for right now, Laura, we're going to create a database where those people that are arrested for interference, impediment, assault, we're going to make them famous. We're going to put their face on TV. We're going to let their employers in their neighborhoods, in their schools, know who these people are. Because as you said, a lot of these people, they say they're taking time off work to protest. I bet you a lot of them are calling in sick. I bet you a lot of their employers don't know what they're doing. But we're going to make sure everybody knows who they are. We're going to broadcast. They want to broadcast the ICE officer that was nearly killed all over the internet. We're going to broadcast every one of these people we arrest.
The tape of him accepting $50,000 in cash from undercover FBI agents, which, of course, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and company decided not to prosecute.
I think that's why the best identification of this government, this power in Washington, D.C., is that of a kleptocracy. You know, so many of them are looking to get rich. I mean, and in many ways, you have that collision then of the profit-seeking, the cronyism, with these types of actions to try and enforce it. Tom Homan talks about this idea that he's going to make these people famous, as if the people of Minneapolis, the people of Minnesota, aren't firmly behind the protesters.
Right.
You know, this lack of understanding for the other side, if you will. And this, I think, is the real danger of Homan going out there. If they had sent a politician, if they had sent a lawyer, if they had sent someone other than law enforcement out there to take control, I would think possibly the Trump administration may be going in a different route here. But law enforcement, Judge, you know this, they're not used to negotiating. They're not used to getting their way. Even when they do negotiate with a bank robber, the guy's still going to end up in handcuffs, right? It's always going to be their way in the end. For law enforcement, there is no compromise, right? There is no settling. And so I don't see how a guy like Homan goes out there and does that, compromises, settles. And he's already saying he's not going to. He's saying he's going to create, using the vast powers of the surveillance state, which, again, thank you very much, Barack Obama.
I assure you that what he just said, I think it was on Fox News, I think that was Laura Ingraham, will be played, or a transcript of it in court, because it shows that he's violating his oath to the Constitution, which is to preserve the rights guaranteed under the First Amendment, not to threaten people who exercise those rights. I got to play this other clip for you. I really never heard of this person until Chris told me about him, called Charmaine the God. Now, this is a stage name. This is the most popular urban radio station morning talk show in the country. Watch this.
I'm going to tell y'all something, America. I don't know how dark or how bad things are going to get, but I keep hearing people referencing 1940s Germany. But I want y'all to remember something when you are bringing up that history. The Nazis ultimately lost. Nazi ideology was outlawed through denazification. One day we will see the demagnification of this country. It will come. And you know what else happened? Leaders of the Nazi regime were prosecuted and tried as war criminals.
This kind of conversation is reaching that kind of venue.
And it's not something that we will dismiss, Judge, and say, oh, come on, look at these people exaggerating. Charlemagne the God is just trying to get people to listen to him. He's just trying to get clicks. You know, that's clickbait, what he's saying. No, absolutely not. I mean, you have this position right here. Look, we just had a federal judge, a George W. Bush appointed judge, who is threatening to hold the government in contempt once again. And one of the things that he has pointed out is that ICE, CBP, DHS, has ignored dozens upon dozens of judicial orders.
Correct.
I mean,
and those orders were not to do anything extraordinary. Those orders were, if you have arrested someone who has not been declared deportable by a judge, you can't just deport them. They are entitled to a hearing. Now, who said that? The Supreme Court of the United States. So this federal judge is just enforcing in the form of an order what the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled, and ICE is thumbing their nose at more than 24 of these orders. That's why he ordered Tom Homan's boss, I think the name is Ted Lyons. I might be wrong on the name, and if there is a Ted Lyons out there and I've misstated the name, my apologies, to appear before him and, quote, bring your toothbrush, meaning you might not be leaving the courtroom voluntarily.
You have also, in the last week, this leaked document from ICE, this training document. So people say, oh, they need more training. They're getting it, you know. It's saying that how their administrative warrants, which are meaningless in almost every context except for their own internal needs, are good enough for them to enter into people's homes. That they, the Fourth Amendment, I mean, Judge, they are violating now with Alex Preti, having been murdered, and they're saying, oh, it's because he had a gun. They are now violating wantonly, willfully, deliberately, the First, Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. I mean, are they going to start quartering these ICE agents into people's homes? You know, let's violate the Third Amendment now as well. Yeah. I mean, that's the point we're getting.
You are one of the few people on the planet who was familiar with the Third Amendment. I'm glad you got that one right.
Right. They usually, yeah, don't ask me about 6 to 10. But
the Third Amendment prohibits quartering troops. That is, troops forcing their way into your home and sleeping there without the consent of the occupant of the house. There is a case involving that in my lifetime, involving the riots at Attica Prison in upstate New York. Otherwise, that, thanks be to God, hasn't been used that much in American history. I got to run, Matt. Great conversation. Thank you. Thank you for your passion for humanity, Matt. It always rises to the top. Appreciate your time, my friend. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Judge.
Sure. Coming up on all of this and some of her profound thoughts on Gaza at 3 o'clock, Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.